It is customary to announce Rosh Hodesh on the Shabbat prior to Rosh Hodesh. This custom is found in the Ma'zur Vitri, a prayer book with halachot from France that was compiled in the 11th and 12th centuries. The custom was also mentioned by Rabbi SCA ben Abraham in his book Shibbolei HaLechet in Italy in the 13th century, and by Rabbi David Abu Darham in Spain in the 14th century. Interestingly, in Mahzor Aram Sova, a prayer book that was made by the Jews of Aleppo in the year 1527, Rosh Hodesh was announced when taking out the Sefer Torah on Shabbat morning. That's also when they blessed the congregation and announced fast days, according to Mahzor Aram Sova. And this custom continued into the 20th century in Halab. In Hakam Selim Za'afrani's description of the customs of the great synagogue of Aleppo, he also wrote that they blessed the congregation and announced Rosh Hodesh or fasts while the Sefer Torah was carried, before it was brought to the Teba. Hakam Selim Za'afrani was born in Halab in 1891 and left Halab to move to Israel in the year 1959. We find the same description by Hakam Yosef Abadi Shayo in his book on the customs of Halab. The congregation was blessed and Rosh Hodesh was announced while the Sefer Torah was carried, before it was placed down on the Teba. Hakam Yosef Abadi Shayo was born in Halab in 1893 and moved to Israel in the year 1935. All of these sources, Ma'zor Aram Soba and the writings of Hakam Selim Za'afrani and Hakam Yosef Abadi Shayo, have a different textual version of the announcement of Rosh Hodesh than we have in our Sidurim. Their version is in Aramaic, and it is not preceded by a series of Yirasons, as is found in the Sidurim that we use today. It is important to note that there were two Jewish communities living in Halab. One community lived in Halab at least since the time period of the second Beit HaMikdash, and they were known as the Mustarabim. The other community came to Halab from Spain in the beginning of the 16th century and were known as the Sephardim. Mahazor Aram Soba was composed by the Mustarabim, and that tradition continued side by side with the Spanish traditions into the beginning of the 20th century. Rabbi Shlomo Antevi Saka suggested that perhaps the textual version of announcing Rosh Hodesh that we recite today, which was recited before Musaf, is based on the tradition of the Sephardim. If you announce Rosh Hodesh while the Sefer Torah is being carried, then the congregation would stand for the Sefer Torah. But what is our custom when we announce Rosh Hodesh before Musaf, when the Sefer Torah is on the Teba? Do we sit or should we stand up? According to the book Derech Eretz, the custom in Halab was to remain seated when announcing Rosh Hodesh. There's a difference of opinion among the later authorities about sitting or standing when announcing Rosh Hodesh. According to the Magen Abraham, a famous authority from Poland in the 17th century, it is customary to stand, since he understood that the judges on the Beit Din were standing when they declared the new month, and the Ben Ish Hai wrote that as well. However, Rabbi Akiba Yigar, an authority from Hungary and Poland in the 18th and 19th centuries, understood that the judges on the Beit Din were sitting when they declared the new month. In some Middle Eastern communities, they remain seated when Rosh Hodesh is announced, including in the communities in Algeria, Jerba, and Libya. But in other Middle Eastern communities, such as in Damascus, Egypt, and Baghdad, they stood for the announcing of Rosh Hodesh. In the Halabi community in Argentina, under the leadership of Hakam Ishaq Shahebar, they stood for the announcing of Rosh Hodesh. But Hakam Ishaq Shahebar did not allow anyone to come up to the Teba and hold the Sefer Torah, which is customary in other communities. However, Hakam Yaakov Atiyah, a contemporary and consuegro of Hakam Ishaq Shahebar, is quoted as saying that the custom in Halab was to remain seated when announcing Rosh Hodesh. The custom of Halabi Jews in New York has always been to remain seated when Rosh Hodesh is being announced. On one occasion, when they were announcing Rosh Hodesh in the Midrash in Sha'arei Zion, and everyone was sitting down, including Hakam Yom Tov Yedid Alav Shalom. Afterwards, a young man approached Hakam Yom Tov and asked him why everyone was sitting while Rosh Hodesh was being announced. Hakam Yom Tov asked him, why not? The young man then showed Hakam Yom Tov the Mishnah Berurah that cited the Magen Abraham, who wrote that it is customary to stand when announcing Rosh Hodesh. Rabbi Yedid closed the book, kissed it, and returned the book to the young man. Since standing for the announcement of Rosh Hodesh is a custom that developed in some communities, and it is certainly not a halakhic obligation, each community could and should maintain their own custom. The prevalent custom in Halabi communities that announce Rosh Hodesh before Musaf is to remain seated when Rosh Hodesh is being announced, while in some other communities they stand, based on the writings of the Magen Abraham, the Ben Ish Hai, and the Mishnah Berurah.